My name is Lucia Sterling, and I am 32 years old. 10 years ago, on Christmas Eve, I discovered I had been erased from my own family, removed from their lives like a stranger who never belonged. My mother, a federal judge who valued prestige above all else, looked me in the eye and told me that I was no longer welcome at her table because I smelled like onions and failure. She handed me a check for $5,000, told me it was a severance package from the Sterling dynasty, and asked me to leave before the distinguished guests arrived. I didn't scream. I didn't call her crying. I simply disappeared the way she wanted me to. I took that check, tore it into confetti over her pristine Persian rug, and walked out into the snow in my heels without a coat. What my mother Margaret didn't know was that 10 years later, I would be standing in the kitchen of the Obsidian, the restaurant I built from nothing, which had just been named the #1 dining destination in New York City. She didn't know that while she was sitting at table 1, waiting for a moment in the spotlight to show off her successful daughter, she was actually walking into a trap of her own making. Before I tell you about the dinner service that destroyed my family's reputation, please take a moment to like and subscribe, but only if this story truly speaks to you. Where are you watching from right now? Tell me in the comments. To understand why my mother's face went pale when the main course arrived, you have to understand the evidence I was holding. In the culinary world, we talk about mise en place having everything in its place before you begin cooking. My mother thought she had prepared everything perfectly to erase me. She thought that because she had money and status, she could rewrite history. But she forgot that in the digital age, you can delete a contact, but you can't delete the truth. I pulled my phone out of my chef's coat. On the screen was a single file I had saved for a decade. It wasn't a screenshot of a WhatsApp group like the one my cousin Rachel sent me years ago. It was a voicemail. A recording dated the 25th of December 2014, left at 11:47 p.m. I stared at the screen, at my mother's words frozen in digital ink. "Some receipts you keep forever," I whispered to myself. I didn't know back then that I would need it. I just knew I couldn't let those words disappear. And tonight, for the first time in 10 years, I wasn't going to listen to it alone. The entire dining room was going to hear exactly why the Sterling family had severed ties with their daughter. To understand why a simple voicemail terrified a federal judge, you have to understand the Sterling standard. In my family, you were either a ruler or a servant, and there was no middle ground. My father was the CEO of a private equity firm in Manhattan. He looked at the world through a spreadsheet, viewing people as assets or liabilities. My mother, Margaret, was a federal judge who wore her judicial robes like a suit of armor and treated her home like a courtroom where she was the only one allowed to deliver a verdict. And then there was my older sister, Isabella. Isabella was the masterpiece. By 28, she was a neurosurgeon at Mount Sinai. She was the crown jewel of the Sterling dynasty. She treated her patients like numbers on a chart, and her collection of designer handbags like actual children. She was perfect, cold, and ambitious, exactly what my parents wanted. And then there was me, Lucia. The mistake. I was the youngest, the one who didn't quite fit the family portfolio. While Isabella was spending her summers at debate camp or interning at law firms, I was sneaking out the back door of our estate to the local diner in town. I begged the line cooks to teach me how to hold a knife, how to emulsify a sauce, how to break down a chicken. I found peace in the chaos of a kitchen, a sharp contrast to the cold, sterile silence of the Sterling dinner table. But the narrative was already set. I was going to Harvard Law. The donations had been made. The path was paved. My mother had already told her friends at the country club that she would soon have a daughter on the Supreme Court track. The night I told them the truth is burned into my memory. It was at a celebratory dinner for my acceptance to Harvard. I stood up, my hands shaking, and told them I was declining the offer. I told them I had been accepted to the Culinary Institute of America and that I wanted to be a chef. The silence in the dining room lasted 17 seconds. I counted. My father put down his crystal wine glass and looked at me with pure, unadulterated disgust. He didn't yell. He spoke with the quiet, terrifying authority of a man who owned everything in the room. He said, "You want to be a servant, Lucia. You want to spend your life sweating over a stove serving people like us. We do not raise the help. We hire them." My mother wiped her mouth with a linen napkin and added, "If you choose this path, do not expect us to walk it with you. We do not have a daughter who flips burgers for a living." I thought they were bluffing. I thought they were just angry. But the exclusion didn't happen all at once. It crept in slowly like mold in the corners of a room no one bothered to clean. At the next family gala, there was no place card for me at the main table. I found my seat in the back, near the swinging kitchen doors where the catering staff went in and out. When I asked my mother about it, she adjusted her pearls and said, "Oh honey, we just ran out of room at the main table. Besides, you are more comfortable near the kitchen anyway, aren't you?" That was the beginning of the end. They were slowly demoting me from daughter to stranger, preparing themselves to cut the cord completely. But the final blow didn't happen in a boardroom. It happened in the foyer of my childhood home on Christmas Eve, 2014. The Sterling estate was decorated with military precision. A 12-foot spruce tree stood in the center of the grand staircase, shimmering with vintage glass ornaments. Catering staff moved silently through the halls carrying trays of champagne. I arrived at 7 o'clock sharp, straight from a double shift at the Culinary Institute. I was wearing my chef whites because I didn't have time to change. My hands were red from scrubbing pots and I smelled faintly of roasted garlic and sanitizer. I didn't even make it to the main salon. My mother met me in the entryway, blocking my path to the guests like a bouncer at an exclusive club. She looked me up and down, her eyes lingering on the grease stain on my sleeve with a mixture of pity and revulsion. She didn't say Merry Christmas. She reached into her clutch and pulled out a cream-colored envelope. She said, "You are ruining the aesthetic, Lucia. Look at you. You look like the help." I reached for the envelope thinking it was a holiday card. It wasn't. Inside was a cashier check for $5,000. She continued in a voice so quiet it chilled me more than the winter air outside. "Consider this your severance package. Your father and I have discussed it. If you insist on living this lifestyle, you will not do it under this roof. Take this money. Go find a cheap apartment in the city. And do not come back until you are ready to be a Sterling again." The realization hit me with the force of a physical blow. She wasn't just kicking me out. She was firing me. To Margaret Sterling, being a daughter was a job description and I had failed the performance review. I looked at the check. $5,000. That was the price of my mother love. That was the value she placed on our relationship. I didn't cry. I felt a sudden, absolute clarity. I took the check and tore it down the middle. Then I tore it again. I let the pieces fall like confetti onto the pristine marble floor. I turned around and walked out the heavy oak doors into the snow. I didn't have a coat. I walked down the long, winding driveway in my non-slip kitchen shoes, shivering as the wind cut through my thin chef jacket. As I reached the iron gates at the end of the property, my phone buzzed in my pocket. I pulled it out, expecting an apology. Maybe my father had seen me leave. Maybe Isabella had a conscience. It was a voicemail from my mother left only 2 minutes after I walked out the door. I saved that voicemail. I saved it through 4 different phones. I backed it up to the cloud. I kept it for 10 years because I knew that one day I would need to remind myself why I never went back. And tonight, inside my restaurant, that recording is finally going to be heard by the only people my mother actually cares about, her audience. For the next 10 years, Lucia Sterling ceased to exist. At least that is what my mother told her friends at the country club. I found out later from an old acquaintance that Margaret had invented a convenient lie to explain my absence. She told people I was finding myself in Europe studying obscure art history in Florence. It was a glamorous lie designed to protect her reputation. The truth was far less romantic. I wasn't in a villa in Tuscany. I was in a basement apartment in Queens that was smaller than my sister's walk-in closet. I slept on a mattress on the floor, and my view wasn't the Italian countryside, it was a brick wall and a fire escape. While Isabella was posting photos of her new Rolex and her Hamptons weekends, I was working 18-hour days. I started at the bottom just like my father mocked. I was a dishwasher at a dive bar, then a prep cook chopping 50 pounds of onions until my hands were stained yellow. I didn't make money. I barely made rent. But for the first time in my life, I was happy. I found my real family in the heat of the kitchen. I met Marcus, my sous chef, on a line in Brooklyn. He wasn't a doctor or a lawyer. He was a guy from the Bronx with a criminal record and a talent for sauces that could make you cry. He didn't care about my last name. He cared about my knife skills and my work ethic. One night after a brutal service, Marcus shared a cigarette with me in the alley and said something that changed my life. He said, "Family isn't about whose blood you have, Lucia. It is about who holds the line with you when the fire gets hot." That became my mantra. I worked my way up from line cook to chef de cuisine. I saved every penny. And finally, with a small loan from a mentor who believed in me, I opened the Obsidian. It was everything my childhood home was not. It was dark, loud, and gritty. The walls were black volcanic stone. The music was heavy bass. And the food was aggressive, unapologetic, and real. We didn't have a marketing budget. We just cooked. And then the whispers started. Food bloggers found us. Then the critics. 3 months ago, the New York Times gave us 3 stars. Last month, Food and Wine magazine put my face on the cover, calling me the prodigal chef. I had done the impossible. I had succeeded without the Sterling money, and without the Sterling name. I thought I was safe. I thought I had outrun them. But success is a beacon, and it attracted the one thing I tried to escape. On a Tuesday afternoon, the phone rang at the host stand. My hostess picked it up, listened for a moment, and then looked at me with wide eyes. She said, "Chef, it is a reservation request. It is from the office of Judge Margaret Sterling." I stared at my hostess, feeling the blood drain from my face. "Repeat that," I said, my voice barely a whisper. "It is a reservation for 4, she said, looking down at the reservation tablet. "For this Friday at 8 o'clock. The caller identified herself as the executive assistant to Judge Margaret Sterling. She said it is a celebratory dinner because the judge is— She paused, reading the note, so incredibly proud of her daughter's recent accolades. Proud. The word tasted like ash in my mouth. For 10 years, my mother had told the world I was studying art in Europe to hide the shame of having a cook for a daughter. She had missed every birthday, ignored every milestone, and erased me from the family tree. But now that my face was on the cover of Food and Wine magazine, now that I was a star, suddenly I was worthy of the Sterling name again. I walked into the walk-in refrigerator to scream. The cold air hit my face, grounding me. They didn't want to see me. They didn't miss me. They wanted to be seen. They wanted to sit at the most exclusive table in Manhattan and pretend that my success was their creation. They wanted to hijack my narrative. When I walked back out, Marcus was waiting. He had heard. "Say the word, chef," Marcus said, crossing his arms. "I will call them back right now. I will tell them we are fully booked until 2030. Or better yet, I will let them show up and then bounce them at the door. You do not have to feed these people." I looked at Marcus, my chosen family, the man who had held the line with me when we were nobodies. Then I looked at the open kitchen, the stage I had built with my own blood and sweat. If I canceled their reservation, they would spin it. They would tell their country club friends that poor Lucia was still unstable, still holding on to petty teenage grudges. I would be the villain, and they would be the martyrs. "No," I said, a dangerous calm settling over me. "Take the reservation." Marcus looked at me like I was insane. "Lucia, they kicked you out in the snow. You cannot seriously be thinking about cooking for them." "I am not just going to cook for them, Marcus," I said, walking over to the pass and picking up a Sharpie. "I am going to curate an experience for them. In fine dining, a tasting menu tells a story, right? Well, tonight, I am going to serve them the history of the Sterling family." I looked at the reservation tablet and tapped the screen. "Put them at table 1, I ordered. "The elevated booth. I want the whole dining room to see them. And tell the front of house that this is a VIP table, which means very important punishment. I want the service to be ice cold. Professional, yes, but no warmth, no smiles. Treat them exactly the way they treat the help." Marcus grinned, a slow, shark-like smile. "Yes, chef." At 8 o'clock exactly, the heavy iron doors of the Obsidian swung open. My mother, Judge Margaret Sterling, entered first. She was wearing a vintage cream Chanel suit and the same pearls she wore when she evicted me. Behind her was my father, checking his watch as if he had somewhere more important to be. And trailing them was Isabella, looking at her reflection in the glass entryway to ensure her blowout was still perfect. They didn't wait for the hostess. They walked right past the "Please wait to be seated" sign with the effortless arrogance of people who believe they own every room they walk into. When my hostess, a tough girl from the Bronx named Sarah, stepped in front of them, my mother stopped and looked at her like she was a stain on the carpet. "Name?" Sarah asked, her voice flat. "I am Judge Sterling," my mother announced, loud enough for the bar patrons to turn their heads. "I am the owner's mother. We are here for the VIP table." I was watching from the past the narrow window that separates the kitchen from the dining room. I saw Sarah look back at me. I gave a microscopic nod. "Right this way," Sarah said, leading them not to a quiet corner, but to table 1. Table 1 is on a raised platform in the center of the room. It is usually reserved for celebrities or food critics. Tonight, it was a stage. As they sat down, I saw my mother scan the room. She wasn't looking for me. She was looking to see who was watching her. She spotted a senator dining at table 4 and a famous tech CEO at the bar. She sat up straighter, smoothing her napkin. She was in her element. Then came the performance. Isabella pulled out her phone. She leaned her head on my mother's shoulder, held up her wine glass, and snapped a selfie. I could practically see the caption she was typing. "So proud of my little sister tonight. Family first. Number chef life, number proud sister." It was nauseating. 10 years of silence, 10 years of pretending I was dead, erased in a single hashtag because now I had something they wanted. "Chef," Marcus whispered beside me. "They're flagging down the waiter. Your father is snapping his fingers." I looked out. Sure enough, my father was snapping at our sommelier, looking irritated that his water glass wasn't already full. They hadn't changed, not one bit. They were still the same people who viewed service as servitude and talent as a commodity they were entitled to. Any lingering doubt I had, any tiny part of me that wondered if I was being too harsh, evaporated in the heat of the grill. "Service," I said, my voice cutting through the noise of the kitchen. "Table 1. Fire the first course." In the world of fine dining, a tasting menu is not just a meal, it is a narrative. It has a beginning, a middle, and an end. Tonight, the narrative was a tragedy in 3 acts, and my family had front row seats. The first course left the kitchen at 8:15. My brigade moved with military precision, placing the plates simultaneously in front of my mother, father, and sister. The dish was beautiful, a single, hand-dived scallop, seared to perfection, but it wasn't served on our signature slateware or fine bone china. It was served on cheap, chipped, beige ceramic plates that I had bought from a thrift store for 50 cents apiece. They looked out of place against the white tablecloth, like a stain you couldn't scrub out. My mother frowned, her finger hovering over a crack in the glaze. She signaled the server, a young man named Elias whom I had coached perfectly for this moment. "Excuse me," she whispered, trying to keep her voice low. "I think there has been a mistake. This plate is broken." Elias didn't apologize. He didn't offer to replace it. He stood with his hands clasped behind his back, his expression blank, and spoke loud enough for the senator at the next table to hear. "There is no mistake, madam. The chef calls this dish the folding table. It represents the seat she was assigned at family holidays for 10 years, while the main table was reserved for the children the family considered successful." Isabella let out a sharp, nervous laugh. She looked around to see if anyone was watching. "Oh," she said, picking up her fork. "It's performance art. How edgy." Lucia always did have a flair for the dramatic. They ate it. They had to. The food critics in the room were watching them, taking notes on the supportive family, enjoying the chef's bold artistic vision. Then came the second course. The smell hit the table before the bowls did. It was intense, pungent, and overwhelming. Roasted alliums, charred scallions, pickled shallots, and a reduction of caramelized onion broth. It was the scent of a working kitchen, concentrated and undeniable. Elias placed the dark, murky bowls in front of them. My father stared at the broth, his nose wrinkling slightly. "And what is this supposed to represent?" he asked, his voice tight with irritation. "This course is titled The Smell of Failure," Elias recited, his voice cutting through the ambient noise of the dining room. "It is an homage to the final words the chef's mother spoke to her on Christmas Eve 2014, when she told her daughter she smelled like onions and failure before evicting her from the family home." The silence at table 1 was absolute. My father put his spoon down. My mother's face, usually a mask of judicial calm, twitched violently. She looked toward the kitchen, toward the pass where I was standing in the shadows. For the first time, she wasn't looking for a servant. She was realizing she was looking at a sniper. I saw my father reach for his napkin, his knuckles white. He wanted to throw it down. He wanted to storm out. But he froze. To his left was the New York Times critic. To his right was the city's elite. If they caused a scene now, if they walked out on the celebratory dinner for their daughter, they would look insane. They were trapped in the spotlight they had demanded, forced to swallow the truth one spoonful at a time. The third course was cleared, but the plates were not replaced. The service staff stepped back into the shadows, leaving table 1 isolated in a pool of light. It was time. I wiped my hands on a side towel, took a deep breath, and stepped out of the kitchen. I was wearing my pristine white chef coat with my name embroidered in gold thread. I walked across the dining room floor with the same authority my mother used to walk into a courtroom. The murmur of the crowd died down. Every eye was on me. When I reached table 1, I didn't smile. I stood 3 feet away, my hands clasped behind my back in the parade rest of a commander inspecting the troops. My mother stood up immediately. She adjusted her Chanel jacket and put on her best benevolent judge mask. She opened her arms wide, loud enough for the press table to hear. "Lucia, darling," she exclaimed, her voice trembling with manufactured emotion. "We are so incredibly proud of you. We always knew you had this genius in you. Look at what you have built." She tried to rewrite 10 years of neglect in 10 seconds. Isabella chimed in right on cue, raising her glass. "I have been telling everyone at the hospital about my sister, the chef. It is just amazing to finally be here." I did not move. I did not hug them. I let my mother's arms hang in the empty air between us until she awkwardly lowered them. "You didn't know I had genius, Margaret," I said, my voice low and steady. "You told me I smelled like onions and failure. You didn't support me, Isabella. You gave me a fast food hat for my birthday and laughed when I cried." My father's face went red. He hissed under his breath. "Lower your voice, Lucia. You are making a scene." "I am not making a scene," I corrected him. "I am providing service. You wanted the chef's attention. Now you have it." My mother's smile faltered, but she didn't drop the act. She leaned in, her eyes hard as flint while her mouth kept smiling. "Now, Lucia, don't be dramatic. We pushed you to be great. If we hadn't been hard on you, you never would have achieved this. It was tough love. We did what was best for the family." I looked at them. The woman who evicted me. The father who disowned me. The sister who mocked me. They truly believed that my success retroactively justified their cruelty. They thought they could deposit my hard work into their emotional bank account. "It wasn't love," I said clearly so the table next to them could hear. "It was a transaction. You invested in children like you invest in stocks, and when you thought I was a bad investment, you sold. You voided the contract." My mother's eyes darted around the room, checking to see who was listening. "Lucia, that is enough. Sit down and join your family." "No," I said. "I have one more course for you. You want to tell everyone how much you supported me. You want to claim credit for this moment. So let us listen to the support you gave me on Christmas Day, 2014. I raised my hand and signaled to the sound booth. The ambient noise of the dining room vanished as the speakers crackled to life. It wasn't music. It was a voice that every person in the room recognized from the local news and the federal courthouse. It was Judge Margaret Sterling. The recording was crisp and clear, preserved perfectly by the cloud. "Lucia, this is your mother. Do not bother coming back for New Year's. We have told the extended family you are studying abroad to save us the embarrassment of admitting our daughter is a servant. You are on your own. Do not use the Sterling name. You are no longer one of us." The recording ended with a sharp click. For 10 seconds, the only sound in the obsidian was the hum of the ventilation system. My mother sat frozen in her chair, her face the color of old parchment. The benevolent mask she had worn all evening had shattered, revealing the cold calculation underneath. Isabella looked at her phone, which was still recording on the table, realizing she had just live-streamed her own family's destruction. My father stared at his wine glass, unable to look at me or the diners surrounding us. I stepped closer to the table. The silence gave my voice a terrifying weight. "You were right, Judge Sterling," I said. "I am not one of you. I am a servant. I am a cook. I serve people who appreciate the craft and the labor that goes into a meal." My mother tried to recover. She stood up, her hands shaking as she reached for her purse. That was 10 years ago, Lucia." I was angry. You cannot hold a mother's anger against her forever. It wasn't anger, Margaret, I corrected her. It was a verdict. You sentenced me to exile because I didn't fit your aesthetic. You erased me. And now that I have built something of value, you want to claim ownership of it. I signaled to the front of the house manager. 2 large security guards who had been waiting in the shadows stepped into the light. In the hospitality industry, we have a strict policy. I announced, my voice carrying to the back of the room. We do not serve guests who mistreat the staff. Since you view us all as beneath you, I think it is time for you to leave. Isabella stood up, knocking her chair back. This is humiliating, she hissed. You are kicking us out. We are your family. No, I said, looking her dead in the eye. You are customers who just had their reservation cancelled. Security stepped forward. Sir, ma'am, the guard said, his voice brooking no argument. Please come with us. I watched as my parents stood up. They didn't look like titans of industry anymore. They looked small. They looked like people who had just realized that money cannot buy respect. As they were escorted through the dining room past the food critics and the senators and the regulars who knew my story, a slow sound began to build. It started at table 4. A slow, deliberate clap. Then table 7 joined in. Within moments, the entire restaurant was applauding. They weren't clapping for the drama. They were clapping for the justice. The applause started at table 4. It began as a single slow clap from a food critic known for his harsh reviews, and then it rippled through the dining room like a wave. Within seconds, the entire restaurant was on its feet. They were not applauding the drama. They were applauding the justice. I did not bow. I simply nodded once, turned on my heel, and walked back into the kitchen. My hands were shaking slightly, not from fear, but from the adrenaline of finally cutting out the rot that had infected my life for a decade. Marcus handed me a glass of water and looked at the clock. Service in 5 minutes, chef, he asked. Yes, chef, I replied. And we got back to work. 3 months have passed since that night. The fallout was swift and brutal. Someone in the dining room had recorded the audio of the voicemail and posted it online. It didn't take long for the internet to identify the voice of federal judge Margaret Sterling. The humiliating viral moment forced my mother to resign from her charity boards. She could no longer sit in judgment of others when the world knew how she treated her own daughter. Isabella set her social media accounts to private and stopped posting about her perfect life. My father threatened to sue for defamation, but his lawyers reminded him that truth is the ultimate defense. Last week, a letter arrived at the restaurant. It was on heavy cream-colored stationery with my mother's monogram. I didn't open it. I didn't tear it up like I did with the check 10 years ago. I simply placed it in a drawer in my office unopened. 10 years ago, I would have desperate to read it, hoping for an apology. Today, I realized I do not need her apology to be whole. I stood in my empty kitchen this morning, looking at the Michelin stars on the wall. I realized that I did not build this empire to prove them wrong. I built it because this is who I am. If you have watched this story from the beginning, I want you to remember one thing. You are the chef of your own life. Do not let anyone else write your menu. You have the right to curate who sits at your table. You have the right to refuse service to anyone who treats you with disrespect, even if they share your DNA. My name is Lucia Sterling. I am not a servant. I am not a mistake. I am a chef. And for the first time in my life, my kitchen is finally clean. Thank you for listening to my story. If this series resonated with you, please like this video and subscribe to the channel. And tell me in the comments, have you ever had to cut off a family member to save your own peace? I will be reading your stories.